This is a school. You can recognize it almost immediately, right? It's the 1950s. It's in Massachusetts. These students are on the college prep track. And it's, it's way back in the last century, but immediately you know exactly what you're looking at. This is a vocational school, somewhat later in the last century, also in a public school in Massachusetts. This is probably not immediately recognizable as a school. It looks more like work, even though here too, the activity is purposeful and structured. And what I want to talk about today when we talk about technology and education is I want to talk about these two competing ideas of what education should look like. I want to talk about the way in which technology is disrupting our idea of school, and I think, and I hope, will fundamentally alter our idea of what a school should look like. When we think about the future, what we tend to do is we have an idea of the way the world works, and then we add more gizmos, right? So we take the current technology that we're playing with and we extrapolate out its power, rather than imagining new technologies. And we imagine that the pattern of social relationships will remain fundamentally intact, right? It's kind of the Jetsons theory of the future, right? They have this amazing technology, they have a robot that can do all their work, they have flying cars, but at the end of the day, right, it's an old straight couple who are married, their 2.0 kids, a dog, and a single occupancy vehicle. And I was shocked when I saw this. I'm going to show some very cool stuff that Apple is doing later, but just if we can kind of like deconstruct what's implied by this image, right? Which is that the classroom of the future will be like any crappy lecture course you took freshman year, only with $40,000 more of hardware. Right? It's the Jetsons theory of the future of technology and education. Basically two ideas in the history of education. One is the idea that knowledge is something you get, right? That it's something I give to you. That I have it and you don't, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to give it to you now, and then you have it and then you can give it to someone else. Right? It's like knowledge is an entity that is transferable. But the other idea is what a teaching nerd would call constructivism, the idea that knowledge is something that you make. And if you've ever said, like, oh, I made that connection today, then you know exactly the theory here, right? That knowledge is about connections. It's about taking one idea and putting it together with another idea. And that no one can really do that for you. Right? You have to do that for yourself. Anyone recognize who this is? Make a logical guess? Maria Montessori. Right? You got the clue, kind of like late 19th century Italian woman wearing very conservative clothing, but she's got manipulatives here, right? What a teacher would call it. You can put your hands on them. The model of education here is that you can interact with the world around you. And most of what you see if you have kids or you know kids and you go to a good preschool, right? The idea that kids should be interacting with their environment, that kids are natural learners, in the words of Piaget, that they are kind of the scientist in the crib, and that they need, the things they do, they put stuff in their mouth and it drives you nuts, that desire to interact with the world is a fundamental part of how we learn as human beings. edX. Some of you may have heard of edX. I mean, this is a very interesting kind of take on where we can go with technology and education. edX is a partnership between Harvard and MIT, recently announced. And what they're going to be doing is taking all of their course content, all of those lectures, all of those slide decks, all of the handouts, the syllabi, the lab materials, recording them and putting them up on the internet. And you can take those classes now for free. Or you will be able to when it launches. MITx is currently up. Harvard is currently getting online. What's happening in this moment is a young woman who goes to high school here in Seattle, and she's doing physics. But the way she's doing physics is different from a direct instruction model. She's doing physics because she's trying to solve a problem. The fact that you can't necessarily, whenever you need your phone, you run out of battery. And so what's the source of energy you always have? Well, it's the kinetic energy that you create when you move. And so they're prototyping different ways that this might be put together. But now to do that, I need to think more about how kinetic energy works. But I don't need a physics teacher. To the left is a guy with an iPad. To the right is a guy with a laptop. They're looking it up online. She's writing the equation. I haven't asked her to do physics, but she's doing it because now it's relevant. Right now there's connection. And so this is kind of the subtle way that I think technology is going to kind of work its way into our classrooms, right? It's not that now everyone goes into their learning pod, right? Like Superman on Krypton, and we're just immersed with data. It's that it becomes a seamless part of our experience, and it fundamentally alters who's at the center of that classroom. This was on the left was the highly valued form of education. This is what you wanted for your kid. You wanted to get them out of the vocational track. That was their ticket to the professional class. And I would argue that 5 years from now, if not now, if this is what your kid's school looks like, you should be mad as hell. because this is not what kids need to succeed in the 21st century. It's going to look much more like this. Still purposeful, still structured, but learning by making, right, with technology underneath it all. Okay, so that's my talk.